Please silence your mobile devices. Our program is about to begin. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the final plenary session of the 2022 J Street National Conference. In this session, we'll be hearing from American lawmakers and top policy experts from Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East about possible directions for U.S. policy in the region. Specifically, we'll take a look at what the deepening Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a calcifying, undemocratic one-state reality means for American foreign policy and how the Biden administration could best advance U.S. interests as the situation on the ground risks worsening with a new far-right Israeli government set to take office and growing instability in the Palestinian territory. A significant part of this discussion will focus on the changing dynamics between Israel and some of the Arab states in the region following the recent normalization agreements and the new regional cooperation structures like the Negev Forum. A key question we will explore is whether enthusiasm for normalization and the enhanced regional coordination emerging from it can be harnessed and directed to address urgent issues related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, incorporating both Palestinians and issues of concern to them into a process some regard as an end run around them. This was the subject of the new J Street Policy Center's inaugural symposium in September, and we'll be hearing from some of the symposium's top experts on this topic today. Starting us off is one of the most senior and well-respected members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and longtime friend of J Street, Congressman Gerry Connolly of Virginia. Congressman Connolly is one of our country's most senior and respected voices on foreign affairs. Prior to his election to Congress, he worked for the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations before going into local politics, sitting on and later chairing the Fairfax County Board for nearly 14 years. In the House of Representatives and beyond, he is known both as a tireless champion of the U.S.-Israel relationship and a principled opponent of efforts to undermine the shared interests which underpin it, critically serving as one of the leaders of the congressional charge against unilateral annexation of Palestinian territory. We are always grateful for his views and counsel, so please join me in welcoming to the stage Congressman Gerry Connolly.
Well, good afternoon. You know, I happen to believe local government is the most important level of government in the United States. You actually have to do something. When I was chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, one of the largest local governments in America, my daughter was in the 5th grade, and I was invited to speak to her 5th grade about the relationship among local, state, and federal levels of government. And I accepted, and I gave a stem winder of a speech, if I do say so, to that 5th grade. I talked about the delicate balance between taxation and the provision of services. I talked about the cultural differences between Northern Virginia and the rest of Virginia. I talked about the intergovernmental relations among state, federal, and local government, and I wound up with great panache, and I got very polite applause from that 5th grade. With one exception. There's one little girl with her arms akimbo and a scowl on her face. And I went up to her and I said, "You didn't like my talk?" She said, "No, I thought it was boring." My daughter could see the stricken look on my face, and she came running up and said, "Oh, Dad, don't listen to her. She just repeats what everyone else says." So it might be the most important level of government, but it's not the most respected. certainly in the 5th grade. I want to thank you for being here and for such wonderful presence and attendance to ensure that we have a rigorous and vibrant debate about the Middle East, about Israel, about the United States' relationship with Israel, and about Israel's future. And I come to you today with mixed feelings, and I'm sure you share them. We have a very aging Palestinian leadership that seems moribund and incapable of rising above corruption and incapable about delivering the services local government here in the United States does deliver, has to. And as a result, the peace process on the Palestinian side has been frozen. And on the Israeli side, we have a return to office of former Prime Minister, soon to be new Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Now, I am a lifetime supporter of Israel. I have spent 40 years in Middle East peace, policy. Starting when I was a young man, I was hired by a young senator named Joseph R. Biden Jr., who was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he hired me, and I worked on that committee on the Middle East. I was the only goy. For 10 years, traveled the region, looked at the challenges we faced. I wrote the foreign aid bill as a staffer that transferred aid to Israel from loans to grant and shot it up to make sure that Israel was strong. I met every prime minister of Israel, starting with Yitzhak Shamir, until the present. And I was always struck that Bibi Netanyahu was a bit different in terms of Israeli politicians. Contrast, I spent a lot of time, my last visit to Israel, with the late Shimon Peres, a mensch. He knew the region, he knew the players. He could put things in context. He was a raconteur, but also a very knowledgeable human being, which was a huge asset when we were talking about what next steps were with various other leaders in the region. He brought wisdom and gravitas and a perspective and a sense of political correctness, in a good sense, in terms of how far to push and when to push and who to push. In Bibi Netanyahu's last term in office, he came and spoke to a joint session of Congress deliberately snubbing the head of government of the United States, Barack Obama. He only coordinated with the Republican leadership in the Congress, promised that the subject he was talking about was so important it transcended partisan politics here and in Israel. And he proceeded to trash the Obama policy with respect to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement. Now, I supported that agreement. Thank you for that, but you know not everyone did. Certainly Bibi Netanyahu didn't. For a foreign leader to come to the United States and address the United States Congress and trash one of the key pieces of U.S. policy and in the Middle East to attempt to deter Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And Bibi said, actually, this agreement will accelerate that. So what was the record? When the agreement went into force, Iran kept every metric in the agreement. It kept the agreement on centrifuges, reducing them. It kept the agreement on enriched uranium, reducing it, and exporting extra uranium. out of the country. It closed its plutonium production reactor and cemented it over. It allowed inspections, including random inspections by the IAEA. Other than that, yes, Iran cheated and violated the agreement. And what happened? We pushed the nuclear threshold back by months. And if we'd kept it in force in the next administration, we could have perhaps pushed it back years. And where are we today following Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump's advice on Iran nuclear? They are days away. Days. And the only solution, it seems to me, that Bibi Netanyahu really likes is what they euphemistically call a kinetic solution. Military strike. And the only country that has the capacity now to, in fact, do that efficaciously is the United States. And the consequences of a military strike against Iran and its nuclear facilities could be catastrophic. That's what Bibi Netanyahu's rejection of the JCPOA and his good friend Donald Trump's pulling out of that agreement, a U.S. negotiated agreement that included Russia and China and the EU, Iran, and us. Now Netanyahu's coming back, and he's put together the most extreme right-wing government in the history of Israel, including people who were not long ago designated as terrorist supporting, not only by our government and Europe, but by Israel itself. The hopes for a two-state solution, the hopes for some kind of sane, humane policy on the West Bank are fading. Holding this new government to account by us is going to be critical. Bibi knowing that when he comes here, he better not try to divide us on partisan lines again. He better not risk Israel's long-term support in the United States by making it a partisan issue. And he better listen to voices, including the voices in this room, who are growing in number. Like all of you, I want to see a secure, stable, free, democratic Jewish state. And I also want to see a stable, democratic, free Palestinian state. So we've got our work cut out. But there are some good things that have happened. Donald Trump has retired to Mar-a-Lago. He's running again, but it's not working out so well. Let's keep him in retirement. What do you think? Joe Biden is in the White House. Long time supporter of Israel. But he understands that the policies that preceded him in the previous 4 years took pieces off the chessboard in terms of the peace process. Pieces that should have been part of the negotiation, part of the leverage to try to reach a two-state solution that's meaningful and that works and provides stability. And hope for the people on both sides of that border. He gets that. We also have the Abrahamic Accords, where Israel and many of its previously hostile Arab neighbors have worked out a modus operandi that could provide enormous stability and be a source of support for a peace process. And of course, the most recent agreement with Lebanon on exploiting energy resources in the Mediterranean also has enormous prospects of future collaboration in a region that up until recently didn't have it or any prospect of it. So we're at a crossroads, and the American voice is going to be really important in this crossroads, in informing our friends in Israel, in informing our friends here, and in providing other voices, voices of support for Israel, voices of support for Palestine, but voices that want to see peace, that want to put an end to violence, that want to put an end to instability, so that proud peoples in Israel and in the Palestinian state to be can have a future that isn't marred by episodic violence, isn't marked by human rights violations, isn't marked by occupation, but that has the beauties and responsibilities of democratic states. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your voice and your activism. Thank you for having my back and my colleagues' back who want to see this process go forward. God bless you all, and I hope I wasn't as boring as I was in that 5th grade. Thank you.
It's so great to hear from a longtime champion for peace, security, and justice for Israelis and Palestinians like Congressman Connolly. As the Congressman discussed, U.S. interests in the Middle East are served by a strong relationship with Israel and engagement with Palestinian leaders. The Biden administration has sought to rebuild the U.S.-Palestinian bilateral relationship that had been unhelpfully and even gratuitously undermined by the Trump administration. Resumption of regular dialogue, reinstating humanitarian aid, and the creation of a special representative for Palestinian affairs are all positive moves. Yet, increasing violence in the West Bank, coupled with an incoming Israeli government openly preparing to take dramatic steps against Palestinians' interests, presents a severe challenge to stability in the Palestinian territory. We are grateful that the Palestinian government has offered its views in this critical moment through video remarks by Palestinian Prime Minister Dr. Mohammed Shtayyeh.
Dear delegates of J Street, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. It's my great pleasure to address this important conference, and I wish you all the best. Today in Palestine, while your conference is taking place in Washington, there are quite a number of sad events that are taking place. 10 Palestinians have lost their lives in the last 78 hours. This makes the number of Palestinians who have been killed since the beginning of the year up to 207 Palestinians. More than 6,000 Palestinians have been arrested. Quite a number of people have been injured. A wall is surrounding the city of Jerusalem. Gaza is under siege. The area is divided between Area A, Area B, Area C. Hebron is divided between H1, H2. Checkpoints, more incursions into Al-Aqsa Mosque. All this is happening at a time during the current Israeli government headed by Prime Minister Lapid. Imagine a situation in which the new Israeli government, what is it that they will do? They are threatening to increase more land expropriation and more land confiscation, to bring more settlers, to change the rules of engagement, to adopt a policy by the army, by the Israeli army, to call it shoot to kill policy. More incursions into Al-Aqsa Mosque, more incursions into Al-Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. And this is a recipe for disaster. My prediction is that the coming Israeli government will go into and will take us into a very dangerous situation. This should be stopped. Having said that, our relationship with Washington has improved. Remember all, that we stopped our engagement with the Trump administration, and now we were happy to see President Biden got elected. The administration made quite a number of good promises. They promised to reopen the American consulate in East Jerusalem. They promised to bring back finances to the Palestinians, to UNRWA. They promised to continue respect the status quo of Al-Haram al-Qudsi, Al-Aqsa Mosque. They promised to stop all unilateral acts, including settlements. It's very unfortunate that only one of these promises has been fulfilled, which is funding UNRWA, which is very important. I'm grateful to the administration for doing that. And it is our hope that other things that have been promised to be fulfilled as well. And I hope that the current policy vis-à-vis Israel should be changed. This American policy vis-à-vis Israel is not conducive, is not bringing Israeli government into the peace track. It's on the contrary, that Israel should not be finding a cover at the United Nations by the American administration. And I hope that our bilateral relationship with Washington should not be Israeli-centric. It should not be only related to Israel. We should enjoy a good bilateral relationship. It is our hope that President Biden, when he visited Bethlehem, he stated good things. He stated that he truly believes in two states on the borders of 1967. And we were happy to hear that. But we will be more than happy if the administration will work to fulfill this commitment of believing in two states, to work for achieving a two states. Because what we see today is a total erosion of two states by the Israeli policies and by the Israeli practice. And it is our hope that Washington will push the United Nations to come up with a peace initiative. United Nations is, according to its charter, is the body that should come up with a peace initiative, should maintain peace in the whole world, and including in Palestine. And also it is our hope that Washington will strengthen and support the Palestinian Authority, politically, financially, and economically. This has been happening partially, but not fully. It is our hope also that Washington will oblige Israel to respect the signed agreements. We and the Israelis signed the Oslo Agreement. It is very unfortunate that Israel is violating every single article in the agreement, including our right to have elections. It is very ironic that Israel has gone through 4 or 5 different elections, and they are vetoing our own elections because they're not allowing our people in Jerusalem to be part of the election process. This should stop. Washington should help us to bring back democracy into action in Palestine through elections for the general elections in Palestine. We did go through local government elections. It was very successful, and now we are waiting to be able to have our own national elections. It's also our hope that President Biden will issue a presidential decree, a presidential proclamation stating that the PLO and the BA are partners for peace. President Biden has met our president. He is also the chairman of the PLO. It is not possible that Washington continue to consider the PLO as a terrorist organization at a time when all our dealings with Washington has been going very well. I had the opportunity to meet with more than 88 members of Congress. I find them very helpful, and I hope that the Congress will really take action to correct our relationship with Washington financially, politically, and legally. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that the alternative to two states is a disaster. The alternative to two states is a situation in which Israel will be neither Jewish nor democratic. The alternative to two states is a minority Israelis will be governing the affairs of majority Palestinians. Why do I say this? I say this because today, in historical Palestine, between River Jordan and Mediterranean Sea, there are 7 million Jews, 7 million Israelis. At the same time, there are 7.350 Palestinians, Muslims and Christians. This means that Palestinians are more in numbers by 350,000 Palestinians. This means that a minority Israelis are governing the affairs of majority Palestinians. This means that if we don't go into two-state solution, it means that according to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, all international organizations that has considered Israel to be an apartheid state. I know you don't want that to happen, but I am telling you that this is unfortunately what is happening, and this is the direction where things are going into. A two-state solution is a win-win situation. We have all to call for it, and we have all to push for it, and we have all to make it possible. My dear friends, dear delegates of J Streets, we are hopeful. Palestinians are extending their hands for peace. We know that negotiation is important. Our president has always extended his hand to the Israeli leaders to be ready to sit down and end the conflict. And it is our hope that you, the delegates of J Streets, who believe in two states, that you use your morals, you use your political weight, you use your influence to really to push for a two-state solution to be implemented, and to push the administration and to call upon the administration to recognize Palestine as a state on the borders of 6-7. I thank you for giving me the opportunity. I am always hopeful that tomorrow is better than today. Don't make me the only hopeful person in the area. Make our people full of hope, and you can do it. Thank you.
Our appreciation again to Prime Minister Shtayyeh for those remarks. Clearly, there is a sense among Palestinians and those who support their national and human rights that the current trajectory of the conflict is deeply harmful and dangerous. That's one of the reasons why J Street has prioritized taking a close look at the regional cooperation emerging from the recent normalization agreements between Israel and Arab and Muslim-majority states, and asking whether it can be turned into a vehicle for addressing the conflict rather than being used by opponents of Palestinian statehood as a means to avoid dealing with the conflict. In September of this year, J Street's new policy center launched with a symposium focused on the questions of whether and how this regional integration process could be utilized to address key aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and ultimately help create an environment more conducive to a negotiated peace. More than 50 leading experts and advocates from prominent institutions in the United States, Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East gathered to discuss this approach and generated a number of ideas for how to move it forward. The J Street Policy Center will soon release a compendium detailing these proposals, but in advance of that, we are thrilled to be joined by some of these top experts who will discuss the challenges and opportunities involved in leveraging the normalization accords to make progress in addressing and one day resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I am delighted to hand it over to J Street's own Director of Policy, Dr. Deborah Shushan, to lead this conversation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Deborah Shushan, and I am J Street's Director of Policy. As Adina just mentioned, in September, our brand new Policy Center launched with our inaugural symposium on the topic of Israel-Arab normalization and advancing Israeli-Palestinian conflict resolution. We considered how enthusiasm for and the emerging structures of Israeli-Arab normalization could be harnessed and directed to not only further Israeli integration into the region, but also to counter the harms of ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict and generate real progress toward a political solution. Now, let's be clear, that's no easy task, given how the Abraham Accords have been viewed, both by some proponents and some detractors, as an end run around the Palestinians and challenging perceptions of the need for two states. So we're going to consider this subject now, and I have with me today a distinguished panel of experts that I'm going to introduce very briefly, and I'll ask you to note that their full biographies are in the J Street Conference app. Sitting to my right is Dr. Shira Efron. She is the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Director of Policy Research at the Israel Policy Forum. And she also serves, shout out for IPF, she also serves as a senior fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. Seated to her right, we have Dr. Bashara Baba. He is vice president of the U.S.-Palestinian Council, and he was a member of the Palestinian delegation to the Oslo peace talks, and he taught at Harvard University. Maybe some of you have heard of it. To his right, we have Ambassador Hesham Youssef. He is a senior fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace, and he was a career diplomat with the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, serving in high-level roles in the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So now, what we will do is I'm going to ask each of our participants to offer some initial remarks about how the process of Israeli-Arab normalization can be leveraged positively to also counter some of the harms of the ongoing occupation and also advance progress in terms of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Dr. Efron, I turn to you first.
Thank you, Deborah, and it's such a pleasure being here with, I can't see with those lights, but I know I have a lot of friends here and the IPF colleagues. So I'll just say that, you know, when the accords were signed at IPF, we tried to answer this question, and we launched a research endeavor that took us a good few months. And on the one-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords, we published a report that tried to answer exactly this question. And I think we weren't overtly optimistic in the sense of how to use the Abraham Accords for peace, but we said, how do we use them to keep the two-state window open? And with everything that's happening now, I think this objective is even more important, right? Because this window is unfortunately rapidly closing. So we came up with 6 recommendations, which I'll try to run through them quickly. And if you have time, you can read the report. We have a good executive summary and a one-pager. But I guess the first recommendation is really to capitalize on Israel's immense support for these accords. There's rare unity in Israel, and now there's no unity in Israel about anything, but there's rare unity in Israel about these accords and how positive they are for the country, in the sense that Israelis would be willing to make concessions, real concessions. I'm not talking about, again, because we're not, you know, overtly ambitious here. It's not about dividing Jerusalem, right? But the sort of concessions toward the Palestinians that Israelis will say, well, this is more important to me than an outpost here and there, which most Israelis don't even know where they are located on the map. And it's just, if you see this even with the annexation that was really prevented by the UAE, whether it was going to happen or not, we saw this trade-off. Now, this is true for the current normalizers, so the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and also the potential ones. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but the embrace of the hard right in Israel, the embrace of Ben Gvir by the Emirati ambassador and celebrating the National Day, makes me also think that even him would not like to make them upset. So if they ask him to do something, or in that case, not to do something, there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a discussion about it. The problem is that they are not asking. So this is one issue. With new countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I think we can see more progress on the Palestinian front, and the public will be receptive to this, the Israeli public. Which brings me to the next point, which, you know, when we talk about normalization, really the big prize, the big enchilada is Saudi Arabia. We at IPF, we don't endorse that the US take steps towards Saudi Arabia. This is a very complex issue domestically in the US, foreign policy, but the fact is that you have informal ties being built and strengthened between Israel and Saudi Arabia. We know Netanyahu met with Mohammed bin Salman at least once because Netanyahu's office leaked this meeting, but there were more. There are security partnerships forming as part of CENTCOM and in other places in the Middle East. Israeli business persons are traveling to Saudi Arabia all the time, and then they write about it in the Israeli press, so it's not even a secret. So the idea is, but on the other hand, Saudi Arabia is not normalizing ties with Israel, and they're still the champions of the Arab Peace Initiative, would say, wait, first progress on the Palestinian front, and then we will normalize. So maybe you marry the two, and you think, okay, for the steps that are taking place anyway, Saudi Arabia can ask for a lot, and building on the previous recommendation, there's rationale that the Israelis would accept it. So status quo on Temple Mount, this is something that I think the Saudis definitely can ask for. Maybe even infrastructure projects in Area C. I'm not talking about construction of homes, but infrastructure projects in Area C. Maybe quiet moratorium on home demolitions. These are things, they're not the big piece that the Arab Peace Initiative is supposed to bring, but they're important today nonetheless. I will say also that when we're talking about steps, we should also be talking about Gaza. At the moment, the biggest donor to Gaza is Qatar, with plenty of leverage over Israel, and we're going to talk about, we have a great panel on Gaza on this afternoon. Spoiler, we have great speakers, so you should come to that. But Qatar has strong leverage, and it's not just money. And other countries can have leverage in Gaza if they join the effort. Also, it's not just the new normalizer. What we've seen, I think, as a result of the Abraham Accords and other things is more engagement with Jordan and Egypt. And these are two countries that care about the Palestinians. They do ask, they do try to bring them on. And this is, when we talk about what the US can do, is make sure they're involved in this regional architecture that's being built, and they try to bring in the Palestinians. I'll give you an example. There's the Prosperity Green and Blue, the deal between Israel and Jordan and the UAE on desalinated water from Israel, for solar energy from Jordan. In the original plan, the eco-piece, and I know Gideon Bromberg is here somewhere, the Palestinians were supposed to be part of the deal, and maybe they will come, but this is a tangible thing that can be done and needs to be done with Jordan. And maybe I'll just say the last two is that, the important recommendation that I think we haven't seen just yet is that the Abraham Accords can bring tangible benefits for actual people, not just for governments. Mm-hmm. And they can bring tangible benefits for the Palestinians. And there are so many things that can be done. I can give plenty of examples, but just as the US was able to secure funding for East Jerusalem hospitals, maybe we can talk about capacity building for physicians. We know that there's gap in skills, and there are ideas of a two-year fellowships, but who's going to pay for this? Who's going to provide this? Tech partnerships, R&D, programs for youth, for engaging youth in the economy. Nothing that has been done with the Palestinians over the last few years, addressing the youth problem, and they really have nothing to do. And if you look even at a country like Morocco, they had a beautiful program for integrating the youth. So this is things that can be replicated. If there's a will and interest and sort of an architecture around it and strategy. And I guess the final thing is that whatever happens, and if these recommendations are implemented, it's very important that the countries leading these efforts get to take credit for breakthroughs, because this creates really a conducive cycle of incentives, both for them to do more, for Israelis to accept that, and maybe even for the Palestinians to realize that there could be some benefits for them also.
Thank you so much, Shira. Really appreciate those introductory remarks. And now we turn to you, Dr. Baba, next.
Thank you for having me. I think I have more questions in my mind than I have answers. I wrote an article a few months ago urging the Biden administration to invite the Palestinians to join the Abraham Accords. What do Palestinians have to lose if they do? At this point, nothing. There's nothing to lose. So, and the value to Israel of Palestinian recognition has diminished over time. Now, if you talk to Israeli government officials, they tell you, we ruled them. A 20-year-old soldier can humiliate a person like me as they wish on the borders or checkpoints. So there is very little value from an Israeli perspective in a Palestinian recognition of Israel. Although theoretically, that should not be the case, because Palestine, from a Palestinian perspective, is for Palestinians. And unless the Palestinians agree to give part of their land to Israel, then Israel has taken that land by force or has stolen it from a Palestinian perspective. Now, from an impassionate, calculating, and opportunistic Palestinian perspective, the PLO should actively seek to join the Abraham Accords with the hope that being in the room and not outside the room would provide the Palestinians the leverage that Arab countries can have over Israel in order to extract concessions from Israel. And the ultimate goal here is peace. Whether that peace is going to be based on a two-state solution or on a confederation between a Palestine and Israel, or as most recently, there has been some ideas floating about a confederation between Jordan and the West Bank, another one between Egypt and Gaza, and a third one between those two entities and Israel representing Palestinian interests. You know? Now, Palestinians will not have leverage being inside the Abraham Accords unless Arab countries are willing to use that leverage. Now, for many, many years, we were told by various European, US officials what Palestinian leaders say in private is very different than what they say in public. In public, they're all for supporting Palestine, largely because their populace is supportive of Palestine. But in private, they're sick and tired of Palestinians. Sick and tired. I mean, imagine having a child of your own who does not want to go to work, who does not want to wake up, who does not want to contribute. You get sick and tired of your own child, you know? So the Arab world has become tired of Palestinians, and that's a reality. And if we say otherwise, we would be delusional, okay? Arab states have had security, diplomatic, economic, and other ties with Israel for decades. I mean, I was told, and I don't know to what extent that is true, that the security system in Abu Dhabi, for example, whereby the security establishment knows everything that goes on every street and so on and so forth, was built by Israelis prior to 2009. You know? So, being realistic, Palestinians have two choices. You know, the two-state formula is a nice formula. I don't think it's workable anymore. Not that I'm against having a Palestinian state vis-a-vis an Israeli state. But there is dysfunctionalism within the Palestinian leadership. No elections held, geographically separated, politically separated, And I wrote also an article recently saying that if elections were to be held in Palestine, including East Jerusalem, Gaza, and everywhere, and if there is a 1% chance of Hamas winning those elections, I want to live under a dictatorship. I don't want to live under an Islamic rule. I don't want to live under a Jewish rule or a theocracy, you know. So Palestinians have to put their house in order. Palestinians do not need to beg for assistance. Palestinians have the resources. There is gas in the waters outside of 20 kilometers or miles off of the shores of Gaza. There is oil, from what I understand, in the West Bank. There's plenty of water in the West Bank that the Israelis take and sell back to the Palestinians. Okay? Tourism has not been used for the advantage of Palestinians. I've developed a study that showed that from tourism alone, Palestinian Authority can manage to gather around $500 million a year. Right now, they're getting zero. In fact, I was with the Minister of Communications recently in Ramallah, and he said, we are the only TV that's allowed to be inside the Nativity Church, Church of the Nativity. And we give our feed free of charge. I said, why are you doing that? I mean, would you go into a museum without paying money? Would you go into a castle without paying money? Would you go into the Vatican without paying money? Why give away something that has value and that the other side would be willing to pay for that? Well, in short, if things stay the way they are, and that's the only thing I would agree with Dr. Shtayeh about, demographics will dictate what Israel needs to do. Right now, presumably there are more Palestinians than Jews inside of historic Palestine, and it's not going to get better for the Jews, for the Israelis. It's going to get worse. So it behooves the Israeli government and their supporters to do something about this particular explosive issue. Otherwise, the Israel that you all love, that you want to be democratic, that you want to be Jewish, will end up nothing but an apartheid state. And I'm sorry to end at that bleak note.
Thank you, Bashara. Ambassador Youssef.
Thank you, Deborah. I'll be talking about 4 issues. The first issue is the big picture as it relates to normalization. And the second, to try to answer Deborah's question about how normalization can be leveraged to advance the prospects of peace. And thirdly, to try to link that to the current situation and developments. And finally, offer a few concluding remarks. In relation to the big picture, I think that the normalization agreements have become woven in the fabric of the Middle East scene. They have been a game changer and have become part of the political calculus of the countries of the region on all kinds of developments. The question that we have been analyzing for the last 2 years since the agreements were signed was to examine whether they would constitute a bridge to advance peace or whether they would be a bypass around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Until today, I don't think there is evidence that we have seen that these agreements have served as a bridge, except if you agree with the argument that was put by the United Arab Emirates that these agreements stopped annexation and thereby saved the two-state solution, which is partly true. Secondly, if we go a little deeper and try to answer Deborah's question as to how these agreements can be leveraged to advance peace, there are two groups that are associated with this issue. The first group is the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the normalizing states. And the second group is the catalyzers, the United States, Europe, and other countries in the region, and in particular Egypt and Jordan, and perhaps also Saudi Arabia. In Israel, Netanyahu has been arguing since the agreements and even after the election that his approach is based on peace for peace. And then we will see what will happen with the Palestinian issue at a later stage. And I don't think that this is an approach that augurs well in using these agreements to advance the prospects of peace. On the Palestinian side, they were emotional at the outset in responding to what happened. And this led to deterioration in relations between the Palestinians and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain in particular. And of course, this also doesn't help in advancing the prospects of peace, but we hope that this situation and the tensions between the Palestinians and both these countries would be rectified in the near future. As for the new normalizers, they don't seem to have had a political will so far, and I hope that this changes, to use these relations to leverage their approach to advance peace. And there were a number of opportunities to do so. So the United Arab Emirates decided to invest $10 billion in Israel. They decided to sign a free trade agreement. They decided to have an agreement between the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Israel in relation to energy, providing solar energy to Israel and getting back water from Israel to Jordan, and so on. And many of these steps could have been associated with requesting gestures from Israel towards Israel, but this never happened. Coming to the second group, in relation to the US, the EU, and other countries in the region, the current administration has always expressed hope that these agreements can build bridges and contribute to a negotiated peace between Israel and Palestine. But we didn't see any real effort in this direction. This also applies to the EU. And as far as Egypt and Jordan are concerned, they have been focusing more on trying to rectify the relations between the Palestinians and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain as well because of the tensions there. I am hopeful that this will change in the near future, but this remains an obstacle to having this leverage to advance the prospects of peace. And I think a few additional points need to be mentioned at this juncture. The UAE and Bahrain also mentioned to Israel that there is a glass ceiling, that there is a limit as to what they can do in advancing relations without an advancement on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And on the Israeli side, I think one of the outcomes of these agreements is that it proved to Israel that the claim that the region does not want Israel in the region is simply not true. And the relations have been described between the United Arab Emirates and between Israel and both the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and to a certain extent Morocco, that has been much warmer than the peace between Israel and both Egypt and Jordan. And there is some truth in that as well. But at the same time, the enthusiasm for the normalization agreements are losing ground. And what Israeli media personnel that were present, that are still present in Qatar covering the World Cup, has been reporting and saying that they felt that they were not welcome by all kinds of people coming from different parts of the world, not only from this region, but also beyond this region. And this brings me to today's realities, because this is also a reflection of what has been discussed extensively in the last 2 days about the new government in Israel and how this would affect the whole situation, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it is very difficult not to expect things to deteriorate and violence to erupt, because there are a number of inflection points that may result in such violence, including ideas like prayers in Al-Aqsa Mosque, including legalizing illegal settlements and demolishing Israeli houses, Palestinian houses at the same time. So this also doesn't augur well for what to expect in the near future. Let me conclude by saying that we have heard a number of policy statements from a number of countries that I think are important. The United States have been saying for the last 2 years, a statement that was also repeated by Secretary Blinken yesterday, that the Palestinians and Israelis deserve equal measures of security, freedom, opportunity. And Secretary Blinken yesterday added a new word, justice, in addition to dignity that was there before. And at the same time, when President Biden was in Saudi Arabia, the joint statement that came out of this meeting stressed that the two-state solution, and I quote here, is the only way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in accordance with the internationally recognized parameters and the Arab Peace Initiative. And finally, in the statement also between the US and the United Arab Emirates in the same conference, it emphasized the importance of protecting the prospects of the two-state solution, which was also mentioned several times yesterday by Secretary Blinken. We all know the situation is explosive, that there is no status quo, and the status quo is not sustainable, even for those who believe that there is a status quo. And an approach based on a wait and see is not a strategy. And I think the Israeli-Lebanese maritime agreement was mentioned. And this is a very good example of a huge step and an important step that was achieved with very little political capital. And I think that this can be replicated on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and in other places and in other conflicts in the Mediterranean in particular. After the war in May 2021, the US, Egypt, and Jordan worked very hard on preventive measures in order to ensure that the following year, where Passover, Easter, and Ramadan coincided, and they were partially successful in achieving this objective. Now we are in a totally different ballgame, and the effort that is needed is much, much harder. And if we don't do that effort, the situation may explode and may make things much worse and much further away from the prospects of peace. And I hope that the wisdom would prevail in the leading countries dealing with this issue in order to avoid this outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hisham, for those remarks. Thank you to all of our panelists for their initial remarks. I want to build upon something that a couple of our speakers talked about, which is public opinion. Public opinion in Israel, public opinion in the Arab countries that have normalized with Israel, and public opinion in the Arab world more broadly. So I'd like to ask, and I'll pose this to both Hisham and Bishara, what we know about public opinion toward the Abraham Accords in the Arab world. Is there any indication that the Accords, in terms of actual public opinion data, are creating a warmer peace in contrast to Israel's peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan? Now, on the other hand, Shira, you mentioned that across the political spectrum, there is much love in Israel for the Abraham Accords. At the same time, Hisham mentioned the World Cup, right? And we saw in Doha a lot of expressions. Israeli reporters highlighted this on social media of people from the Arab world and other parts of the world indicating that Israelis were not particularly welcome. And what I'm wondering, Shira, if you could address, is how that was received in Israel, and if there was a sense among Israelis that, hey, if we actually want to have a warm peace and acceptance within the region, we're not going to be able to have that without peace with the Palestinians, an end to occupation. Was there any psychological shift that you think maybe happened or could happen as a result? So let me start with Hisham, perhaps, and we'll work our way back this way.
Thank you, Deborah. I think this is a very complicated issue because public opinion in the Arab world is extremely fragmented, so you can't generalize. But there was a recent poll that was made by the Washington Institute, and it spoke about this issue. And they have had a poll 1 year after the Abraham Accords were signed, and then a second poll after the second year. And the conclusion was that there was a huge drop in popularity of the normalization agreements. But I think the most important point that I want to stress is that during normal times, normal times is one thing, and during crisis is another. And it depends on the crisis. So we all witnessed how public opinion was galvanized as a result of the war that took place in May 21 and in the previous wars as well. And we also see, in particular, how public opinion resonates as a result of developments pertaining to Al-Aqsa Mosque in particular. Mm-hmm. And this is the key issue. Because as far as Palestinians are concerned, the Aqsa Mosque is the heart of the conflict. And when the heart of the conflict is touched, then the whole Arab world and the whole Islamic world becomes galvanized around the Palestinians.
Bishara.
Well, I take issue with the whole notion of public opinion in dictatorships. Enough said. In reality, I think the Palestinians have public opinion polling company that's based, I believe, in Ramallah and Nablus that is more realistic than public opinions would be in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and so on and so forth. The bottom line is, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, nothing is going to happen so long as King Salman is in power, period. Nothing. Because MBS would not dare do anything. That is a red line that the king has drawn in front of the crown prince. Now, do I support integration of Israel in the Middle East and in the region? You know, I do. I support peace. And peace entails integration. That's fair. Peace, however, does not entail occupation.
Shira.
Sure, if I can, I just want to comment on two things that relate to the previous round also. I just want to say that some distinctions between the players and the outside. None of everything that we want, the leveraging normalization towards steps on the Israeli-Palestinian front would require a strategy by the United States. Maybe Europe and the United States. Without it, wouldn't happen. And whether we like it or not, the Abraham Accords wouldn't have happened without US leadership either. So we need a different leadership on that, but this is one thing. The second thing is, I was just surprised, Hisham, that you said about the glass ceiling of the UAE and the Bahrainis, because I'm curious how close this embrace of Ben Gvir, a guy who massacred dozens of Palestinians in Temple, you know, the patriarch, he had a poster of Baruch Goldstein in his living room. How close does that get to the glass ceiling? But because this is where I think we have a problem with the leaderships of these countries, which brings me to your question here. I don't watch the World Cup, but it made the headlines in Israel more than any other things, more than the poor construction workers that build all these fancy stadiums and structures, right? That how the shock that Israelis are not being received well. Mm-hmm. Right, you have people saying, oh, where are you from? You're from Israel. There's no such thing as Israel. It's called Palestine, Palestinian flags in the background. You reminded me, Deborah, about someone from Morocco and the Israeli reporter running after, but we made peace, you know, so the drama. And I think it just gave this reality check that this is really, 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 it's not peace, it's an agreement between leaderships, it's agreement between elites, but it hasn't trickled down to the people. Which explains why even it's so hard in dictatorships to poll people, and especially when the leaderships are touting these agreements as so great, you still have the Washington Institute polling showing that in Bahrain, one of these countries, right, 73% of the people view these agreements as somewhat negative to very negative. That shows us that there's not as popular as they are on the other side, and that has to do with the occupation of the Palestinian people. And it has to do with the fact that whether we like it or not, and we have to be candid, being anti-Israel, and in some cases anti-Jewish, has been something that these leaderships advocated for decades. And you need a concerted effort to uproot these views and to bring normalization between people. We don't have it. You don't have it with Egypt. You don't have it with Jordan. And you don't have it in those countries either.
Shira, I have another question that I'd like to ask of you, and that is about the Arab Peace Initiative. Just for a little bit of context, the Arab Peace Initiative was an initiative that was launched actually by Saudi Arabia in 2002 via the Arab League. It was adopted by unanimous consensus of the Arab League and then re-ratified multiple times, offering Israel comprehensive normalization with the entire Arab world after Israel would agree to Palestinian statehood, a Palestinian state on the 67 lines, and land swaps and a just resolution of the refugee issue, and et cetera. Now, unfortunately, of course, that never went anywhere. Israel never answered the Arab Peace Initiative, but it's still out there. And my question is whether it is relevant, whether it could be updated, could it be leveraged positively?
So, you know, I think when the Abraham Accords were launched, this was to say, some people said what the Arab Peace Initiative is obsolete, right? Because we showed that you can get normalization bypassing the Palestinians. But the fact is that most Arabs have not normalized ties with Israel. Sorry, this is not working. Primarily Saudi Arabia. Now, Bishara referred to King Salman's being the main maybe obstacle or preventing or holding back normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But I think it might be even broader than this, you know. It could be something. We're hearing Mohammed bin Salman today, now the Prime Minister also, referring to the Arab Peace Initiative in his speeches. It is something that, you know, the Saudi, maybe he personally doesn't care about the Palestinian cause and he doesn't want to be liable for the Palestinians longer, but he has a population that does. So I think that there's actually the strength of the Arab Peace Initiative. It's very scarce in words and in details, and he can inject his own interpretation to it, and maybe not sort of the big piece, but going back to modest steps in return for normalization that is happening as is. So I think it does have relevance, and it could be put to use given, you know, the right strategy.
All right, and Hisham, please, Bashar, go ahead.
You mentioned small steps. I'm sick and tired of small steps.
We all are.
You know,
we all are.
or, you know, testing each other's intentions, and, you know, we're not matchmaking here, you know. It's either there is a complete recognition of the Palestinians' right as a people to live in their own country, free of occupation, or there isn't. There is no in between.
Inshallah.
As Shira just said, inshallah, I would concur. Now, on that note, obviously there's so much more that could be said on this extremely important topic. I'm so excited that at J Street we have a new policy center where we get to dig into these weighty questions with experts of the caliber of those that you see on the stage here. So I'm going to thank Shira, Bashara, Hisham. We appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much to our panel of experts for that in-depth discussion. As was just explored, the relationship between Israel, the neighboring countries it first normalized with decades ago, remains incredibly critical. Egypt and Jordan continue to play a crucial role in ensuring Israel's security while also supporting Palestinian aspirations for a universally recognized state. They are indispensable to forming any just and sustainable future for the region that sees all its people flourish. We are therefore delighted to have received the following video address from His Excellency, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, Ayman Safadi of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
Mr. Jeremy Ben-Ami, Mr. Alan Solomon, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this distinguished gathering. Your conference could not have been more timely. Its theme could not have been more relevant. Peace, respect, and human dignity are core values for all of us. Peace is a right for all peoples of the region. It is a necessity for regional and global security. It is essential for our efforts to integrate the region in visions and projects that can provide jobs, create opportunity, protect the environment, harness the potential of our peoples, and can give them hope. Unfortunately, and to the detriment of all of us, this just, lasting, and comprehensive peace, which we and many others have pursued for decades, continues to evade us. The prospects for peace are probably slimmer now than they've been in decades, but we cannot throw the white towel. We cannot allow radicals on both sides of the divide to determine the future of our people. This is the time for all of us who believe in peace, who believe in our shared values, to come together and work together to reverse the dangerous course that's pushing the region towards more conflict. A leading U.S. role in this endeavor is indispensable. Without it, we will not be able to salvage the peace process. Clearly, the U.S. cannot and should not shoulder this responsibility alone. As His Majesty King Abdullah II has long advocated, we in the region have to do our share of the heavy lifting. But for all our efforts to succeed, the Land for Peace formula, on which the whole peace process was predicated, must be unequivocally embraced. The two-state solution must be protected. In the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, we believe that the two-state solution is the only path to the just and lasting peace that we all seek. A one-state reality in which Palestinians do not have their full rights will be a recipe for further conflict. The key question is, where do we go from here? Are we going to remain entangled in this vicious cycle of hopelessness, violence, and systematic obstruction of the peace process? Or will the danger inherent in the status quo and its consequences awaken the necessary sense of responsibility to get back to the negotiation table? Immediate action is needed to preserve the two-state solution. Settlements and confiscation of land must stop. The historical and legal status at the holy sites of Jerusalem must be preserved. The growing violence must end. Political horizons must be created. All of us must act now so that the region does not fall into the abyss of hopelessness, violence, and deeper conflict. So much is at stake. The immediate priority must be restoring calm, stopping measures that undermine the viability of the two-state solution, and then get the parties back to the table. And we cannot allow the collapse of the PNA. We must restore faith in the peace process if we are to stop the deterioration and prevent despair from producing more violence and prevent radicals from forcing their agenda and destructiveness on all of us. Military operations and heavy-handed security measures will not ensure calm. Politicians who propagate hate speech and publicly embrace racial discrimination will not bring an end to the violence. Political and economic horizons for the Palestinian people are a must to enable an environment conducive to calm and peace. Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan will continue to engage all parties to ensure that we're back on track. But we will need a leading U.S. role to move from status quo politics and conflict management to actual peacemaking. The U.S. can certainly count on Jordan as a solid partner. A future of peace that guarantees life with dignity and security, that is free from violence and fear, that offers hope and opportunity, is the right of every Palestinian, of every Israeli, as it is the right of all peoples. We can provide it, we know how to provide it, but we need the will and the hard work to achieve it. This is the responsibility of all of us. This is certainly the commitment of Jordan. Thank you.
Our thanks again to His Excellency for those remarks. J Street has had the privilege to visit Jordan and speak directly with its top statespeople as an extension to some of our Education Fund's trips taking U.S. lawmakers and policy experts to Israel and the Palestinian territory. In recent years, the number and size of these trips has expanded greatly thanks to the generosity and vision of Dr. Patricia Gordon and the late Len Hill and a group of other highly dedicated J Street donors who have made the dramatic expansion of our Len Hill education program possible. Grounded in support for safeguarding Israel's future and committed to uncovering complexity, embracing nuance and covering a wide range of diverse perspectives, the Len Hill education program trips provide an incredible 360-degree view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by engaging firsthand with Israelis and Palestinians of many different backgrounds. To date, nearly 70 members of Congress have traveled to Israel and the West Bank with J Street. Here to share a little bit about their experience on these trips and the insights it gave them about the U.S. role in addressing the conflict are four of the most prominent members of the rising generation of leaders in Congress. Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois, Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton of Virginia, and Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico.
have
Oh,
us backwards.
Stansbury. They do have us backwards.
They have us backwards.
Oops. Backwards.
I'm going to be Wexton.
All right, well, other than us being totally confused on where we're standing, so nice to see you all. So I'm Sean Kasten from the 6th District in Illinois. Really happy to be here. You're too kind. So I've done 2 trips to Israel since being elected in 2018. The second one was with J Street. And I guess what I'd share with you is that I'm a proud progressive. I'm a New Dem, I'm a centrist guy, but I'm a proud progressive in the sense that I don't know how society moves forward unless we commit ourselves to acknowledging both the beauty of what we've done and what we need to do going forward. What do we promise as a country, and who are we actually? And there's no inconsistency with that, but what I love about J Street and the trips that I've done is there's a love of Israel that is based both on who it is and who it promises to be. And you don't get that in other trip that I've had in the region, and society doesn't move forward unless people do that, and it is always hard to do that. There are always voices. It is always easier to support the status quo than to actually support progressive change. So I thank you for doing it. It's been really a privilege to learn with all of you.
Hello, I'm Madeline Dean from suburban Philadelphia, the PA4. Pennsylvania is in the house. It's really an honor. I see hello, how are you? It's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you for including us. Like Sean, I had the chance to go to Israel for the second time with J Street, and what an honor it was. Both trips, of course, were an extraordinary place of learning. A place of learning, as I've told so many of my friends, about my own faith. I'm a Catholic by practice, practicing, we're trying to get it right, but also about so many different faiths. And so while as a freshman I went on the APAC trip, I knew I wanted to go on J Street's trip to make sure I got a fuller perspective of what is life in Israel. What are the struggles? What are the extraordinary beauties and opportunities, the rich history that is there? And so for me, it was a life-changing event to go on the J Street trip, to understand better the deep richness of the Israeli experience, but certainly to understand the injustices and the struggles of the Palestinian life. I guess also I look to you for ideas on how Congress can be a further help to make sure that the nearly 2 million people who do not enjoy full freedoms will get to that place of a two-state solution. I know we'll have a fuller conversation about that, but certainly I'm very, very worried about the events in Israel with the reorganization of the new prime minister, as I worry about what's going on in our own country. So in any event, thank you, J Street. So lucky to be with you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Wexton. I represent Virginia's 10th District in the United States House of Representatives. So this was my very first trip to Israel, and I knew that one of my first CODEL, it was also my first CODEL abroad. You know, I was very, very glad to go with J Street. I knew I wanted to go with them because I knew that it would be a very balanced view of the situation in Israel. And I went not just because I wanted to learn about the culture and the history and, of course, eat some of the delicious food, which is pretty amazing. I don't know how they get cucumbers and tomatoes to taste so fresh over there. But you know, I knew that I wanted to learn more about the plight of the Palestinians and what the day-to-day life was for them, as well as the day-to-day life of a regular Israeli citizen. So and that's exactly what I got with the J Street trip. We met with everybody from prime ministers down to regular folks on the street. It was absolutely amazing. It changed my life, and I will never look at the situation there the same. It's changed the way I look at things now, the way I approach policy and everything. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to go.
All right, well, I'm going to round things up here from the West. I am Melanie Stansbury, and I am proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. And I am so honored to be able to stand here today with my incredible colleagues and, of course, all of you who are partners in peace, in advocating for our friends in the Middle East, in Palestine, in Israel, and to ensure that we bring peace and help to facilitate peace in this region. I had the incredible honor of joining J Street last November on a trip to the region. It was my second time visiting. I grew up in a partially Jewish family, and my family always had ties to Israel. It was a prominent part of our life, and always had a love and passion and interest in the region, in its politics, and in the cultures and history of the area. But I have to say that this trip was deeply impactful on my life. It changed my perspective on many of the issues that I had thought about and cared about for many years, and of course gave me a renewed sense of urgency for the work that we have to do ahead here in the United States, and particularly as members of Congress and allies who have not only a strategic interest in the region, but also a humanitarian interest in the Palestinian and Israeli people and their future. So I want to say thank you to J Street for the opportunity to be able to travel with you, but also I want to take a moment, since it is December and we have just come out of an election. I want to thank all of you who supported pro-peace candidates across the United States, because we won!
So we were asked to talk about some highlights from the trip, and I want to be a little bit metaphysical if I can, because there are specific highlights in the places you go, but what I was really struck by in this last trip is that we talk a lot, as we should, about our unbreakable bond with Israel, and we talk about that in the context of the Shoah. We talk about that, not those of us on the stage, some of us in the context of the rapture. But what struck me on this trip is how much, that joke went on a little too long. What struck me on this trip is how much of the reason that we connect so closely with Israel, nation to nation, is because we have so much commonality in our histories. We both have some awkward history with the British colonial era, which gave us some weird history with the British, but gave us constitutional democracies based on the rule of law. We both have some awkward relationships with the people who were here at the time of that separation from the British colonial era. We are both nations of immigrants, and as nations of immigrants, our coherent story is based on something that is a little bit myth and a little bit truth. And so we understand each other in ways that others don't, and I think we understand through that lens. I highly recommend, I just finished Clint Smith's book, How the Word is Passed. And he has this beautiful line in it where he says there's history and nostalgia, and in between is memory. And our challenge as legislators, as citizens, as human beings, is to figure out how to make sure that memory is as close as possible to history. You cannot understand the history of the United States if you assume it started in 1491 from virgin undeveloped land. You can't understand where we are right now in the United States if you don't understand that for 300 years we depended on free labor. And in the same way, when you get to Israel and you travel, you can't understand the region if you don't go to Hebron. You cannot understand Hebron if you only know it as the Cave of the Patriarchs, if you only know Hebron as the site of the 1929 massacre, if you only know Hebron as a horrific monument to Baruch Goldstein, or if you only know Hebron as the current militarized ghost town that it's become. The history, the myth, the nostalgia is all tied up in all of those things. And in the same way in America, we need our myths. We need something to unify us together. The Israelis also need their myths, but we need to make sure that myth is as close to history as we can. And respect the nostalgia, but be close to it. And that was the opportunity that really stuck with me.
I think I'll go a little more grandmotherly. I kept thinking of my trip in terms of the children that I saw. The Palestinian children, the Israeli children, the other immigrant children running around knowing joy, knowing one another when they had that chance to know one another. And I keep thinking of how we in America want, I think, the same thing that we want for Israel, which is peace and a place of acceptance and of understanding, a reduction of bigotry and anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ, and I kept thinking of the children. It's up to us, the adults, because all of those negative things are learned. I look at my own grandchildren. They don't have any built-in bigotry. They don't have any prejudice toward color or difference or nationality, language. They just see the humanity. They see the fun in the other kid, sometimes the challenge. But that's what I saw when we were in Israel. And sadly, we had a chance to visit with a school, and we were going to go into the school of Palestinian children, but we couldn't because the night before, a graduate of that same elementary school had been killed. A child had been killed. And so we couldn't go there because they were struggling with that violence. We did go to Hebron. I'll never forget Hebron. To your point, you can't describe it to somebody and actually do it justice. It is ghostly. It's ghastly. What I have been told was once a thriving city of merchants and exchange and commerce. Now a city where the streets are segregated, where Palestinians can't walk, where their apartment buildings are caged fronts with locked doors, only able to exit by way of the rear. And we saw some children behind those caged balconies. It makes no sense. It went against every fiber of my being as an American, as a Democrat, as somebody who says, we have to struggle for greater equality here. And certainly that is what I hope for in Israel. The other place of great memory for me is when we visited with a farmer and his family. And they sadly showed us up on this very challenging farm, lots of rocks and some pastures, that their cattle, their goats, were run off the farm by settlers. They showed us videos of settler violence. And so for me, for an American, for a Democrat who wants equality for all, for the beautiful Israeli people and the beautiful Palestinian people, those two visits with families, some at a distance, and some we could be up close with and see their children as they sold us little bracelets. We have to be a part of peace. And my final thing on this is, to a person, they said that the United States is the indispensable nation. And I say that not with a haughtiness, but with a humility. We have an important role to play. J Street gets that. We have an important role to play in moving forward toward peace.
I will start by associating myself with the remarks of my colleagues, as we do in Congress. But I would add a couple things. You know, for me, it was really just so striking, all the groups of people that we met with and all the people that we met with. You know, one of the things that moved me so much was when we went to Gaza, and we were not able to go into Gaza, but we were at a kibbutz just outside of Gaza. And I was really struck by the collective PTSD that whole country experiences. Such a young country, and it has never really known true peace. And one of the things that really struck me there is that they said that the kids in the little daycare there, and these are preschoolers, they're toddlers, they can't even really walk. And they said that when they heard the air raid sirens go off for all the rockets coming, they would just be trained and they would just put their arms up in the air. The reason they would do that is because somebody would come and scoop them up and take them to shelter. And that was a whole generation of children who were raised that way, and that was the only world that they knew. And I know that we can do so much better for them. When we went to Hebron, it was also very tragic because the doors weren't just locked, they were actually welded shut. Mm-hmm. You know, it was just frightening to see. And while we were there, a man came up in his truck, and he was kind of the Israeli version of a MAGA, right? So he had a big Israeli flag in the back of his truck, a couple of them. He came up and started taunting us, yelling at us in various ways, and just really giving us a hard time. And we just, you know, we diffused the situation and talked with the guy. But it did not really bode well for the prospects of the kind of peace that we need. That's why we need to lead, and we need to make sure that we bring back the prospects of a two-state solution. Another thing that I saw is it's not just the Palestinians who suffer this trauma, and the Israelis as well. You know, we talked to some IDF soldiers who had since left the service, who were very traumatized by the way that they had to treat the settlers and the way they had to treat, not the settlers, but the Palestinians and the way that they had to quell violence or what they considered violence. It was really scary stuff, and they are suffering from a lot of PTSD as well. So we need to make sure that we do everything we can to push for this two-state solution. It's very, very important, and it's slipping further and further away every day. One of the things that we saw there were these superhighways that have been built across Israel, and they're bisecting the Palestinian territories, making it impossible for them to be united. And this is by design, and so we've got to do more to make sure that we make it clear that the two-state solution is absolutely necessary. Because I'm not giving up. It's far too important I do believe very strongly, I think many of you do as well, that the only way that we're going to get to lasting peace is with a two-state solution. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, this was my second trip to Israel and the West Bank. I went 22 years ago when I was in my 20s and traveling around Europe and the Middle East as a young person, staying in backpackers, hostels, and traveling to the Holy Land to experience these landscapes for myself. And I have to say that this trip with J Street was deeply transformational for me, not only in my understanding of the region, but also to see the ways in which both Israel as a nation and the West Bank and Palestine have been transformed over the last 2 decades of conflict. There are 2 things I want to share with you about that transformation, which I saw and felt on the ground. The first is the physical transformation of this space. As a young person traveling across those ancient, sacred, beautiful landscapes, I traveled all across the region, across the West Bank. I went up to the Golan, down to the Negev, went down to Eilat and swam in the Red Sea, went to Tel Aviv and partied in the clubs on the beaches, and went to Jerusalem and experienced the Holy Land. And when I saw the ways in which the physical landscape of Israel and Palestine have been transformed by conflict, whether that is the walls that have been erected, the massive highways, the infrastructure to make it possible for expansion of settlement, or it is the actual security infrastructure that surrounds every single community in the region, the entire landscape has been physically transformed by conflict. The second is the way in which the people have been transformed by conflict. As was mentioned, we met with the president, we met with the prime minister, we met with members of parliament in the Knesset, we met with the prime minister of the PLO, we met with scholars, activists, aid workers, and people on the ground and heard their stories and heard about their trauma and their lives. Whether it was children sharing with us in a UN school about their desire for freedom, whether it was families telling us about the ways in which they traverse the streets constrained by the physical infrastructure and security infrastructure, families who are living within rockets range and constant danger, members of the military who shared with us the trauma of their own service and the things that they felt that they had to conscientiously share post-service. It is a place that has been fundamentally transformed by conflict and violence. And the takeaway that I took from this trip was a sense of urgency and moral responsibility as a nation that has a relationship that is so deep, so cultural, so political, so strategic with both Israel and the Palestinian people. We have a fundamental moral responsibility to ensure that the people of Israel and Palestine can live free, and it is our responsibility as members of Congress to help make that a reality.
So I'm hesitating here because then, talking about now, like, what are the reflections? What do we do go forward? There was this completely horribly painful cut like a knife Onion article. You guys read The Onion, America's finest news source. They had this article that said, Palestinian woman who has recently lost her child finds great comfort when U.S. congressman tells her the situation is very complicated. It's painful, right? And who am I, who are we to say that suddenly we're going to find a way to solve this thing, which, in some measures is much harder now than it would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago? And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't want to sugarcoat what that possibility is, but I do know that any path towards achieving peace, towards achieving a two-state solution, cannot be only responsive to what domestic U.S. interest groups say is necessary. You have to be present. You have to be present on the ground there, have to have the relationships there, the conversations, when you could talk to, leadership of the Palestinian Authority, leadership in the Knesset, and say, okay, what would happen if the U.S. were to take a strong position on the location of an embassy, on Palestinian elections, these things that matter, and understanding how that would affect the dynamics on the ground there, it matters, because it's the only way to preserve some possibility to go forward, to make sure, because as Madeline said, people listen to us, and to make sure that the folks who are listening hear it in the way we intend. I think the best reflection I can leave you is on our last night in Israel as we were leaving, Jeremy asked us all to go around and sort of reflect as we will, and I read one of my favorite quotes from Frederick Douglass, because these things are all tied together. I am one of those who think that the best friend of a nation is he who most faithfully rebukes her for her sins, and he her worst enemy who under the specious and popular garb of patriotism seeks to excuse, palliate, or defend them. And I think that is our challenge, if we are friends of both nations. Thank you so much.
Well, we did have a wonderful trip, and I hope we get to do it again. And really, J Street is masterful. Certainly, J Street wants to educate us, members of Congress, about the situation on the ground and the complexity of it, and sometimes the simplicity of it. What is equality? What is justice? What are equal rights? It's quite simple, that we can boil it down to that. But really, think about what these trips do. They build relationships. They build relationships among us. They build relationships among the people of Israel and Palestine. And that's really part of it. So sometimes when I get overwhelmed, when I see the reorganization under the, looks like future prime minister again, and I'm so gravely concerned about the direction that that will be, and that the direction that that coalition will take Israel and the Palestinian people, I try not to get so overwhelmed and believe that these relationship building, these learning trips, the sharing of common human experience, what Israel is struggling with is what we are struggling with. We are struggling to make everyone equal. We are struggling to tamp down on anti-Semitism and bigotry and hate. So it's our lot also. It's not just there, it's here as well. It is a global thing, and we can make a difference. So I'll end. You went with Frederick Douglass. Mary, you're not going to be surprised. I talked to Rabbi Seymour today. And Rabbi Seymour is my friend and my rabbi, Rosenblum from the Philadelphia region, Elkins Park. Yes, give it up for Rabbi Seymour. And he told me he could not be with us today. So I said to him, you know what, let's pray together. We prayed by text. I was thinking of our own, one of my favorite prayers in my Catholic Christian faith are the Beatitudes. You know them. It's blessed are this, blessed are that, blessed are that. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Let us be the peacemakers and be the children of God. And so Rabbi Seymour suggested to me a beautiful one. Psalm 122. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love her find peace among themselves. For the sake of my kinfolk and friends, I will speak only of peace. And I would suggest also that we suggest peace for Americans, for Palestinians, for Israelis, respect for all humanity, with dignity, to end bigotry and intolerance, whether it be anti-Semitism, white supremacy, anti-LGBTQ, and other bigotries. Let us pray for peace in Jerusalem.
Amen. Amen. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful gathering and for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. It has definitely, the J Street trip has definitely changed the way that I do business on the Hill. Now, it's not just on the Hill. I took it with me into my life, into my daily life, and I've used it several times. You know, I think about when I was standing on the Mount of Olives looking out on the sprawling, crowded Jewish cemetery and on the old city of Jerusalem. Now, I didn't know. I mean, I had read about the old city of Jerusalem for many, many years, and I just had no idea that it was so tiny. It's less than a square kilometer. And when you think about it, you have three of the world's primary religions have their most holy sites there. So it's pretty remarkable, and it's pretty amazing that you know, that it's all in that tiny little space. And as I would walk around there, I would reflect on the millennia of people who had walked around there, millennia of dawns that had broken there, and the millions of people who had walked around there before me, and tried to take with them some of that wisdom. And so I don't have a rabbi, you know, who's my rabbi. I don't have Frederick Douglass, but I do have a Grandpa Marv. Grandpa Marv said to me, "It's easy to despair for the future, but those who do not despair for the future, because I have the will and the faith to change it." Right? And that's how I kind of feel about the situation in Israel and Palestine, because and I will tell you that it has come in very handy, because until you go there and you actually see with your own eyes and you talk with your own ears and listen with your own ears to the people who have lived there and live it every day, you don't realize the whole issues that are being faced by the people there and the way that history it permeates every moment of their being. You know, April 15th of this year, you may recall, was actually one of the first night of Passover. It was also one of the Fridays during Ramadan. It was also Good Friday. All three of those big holidays all fell on the same night. And you may also recall that there was a little incident at Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city in Jerusalem. And I didn't know about that. I had gone to Friday prayers to pay my respects to the folks there at the local mosque. And one of the elders of the mosque came and told me about this incident that had taken place there. He was very concerned that it could turn into something more violent, and that there would be an uprising of some sort. So, having been there, I know exactly where Al-Aqsa is. I know the importance of the region. I know the importance of the area. I knew exactly what was going through everybody's mind with everything. And so I went, and as soon as I got out of there, I got on Haaretz, and I read all the news about it, and I made sure that I said to everybody that I think that you know, hopefully things will be more peaceful and everything. And they were, thankfully, you know. So I think that having that perspective really helps. And for me, you know, when I returned home from the trip, we went with another gentleman, David Price, who was the chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee of Appropriations. Many years he'd been a member of the House of Representatives. Really wonderful guy, and he was one of the people who was so active with Hope Flower School and who was hoping to take us there. That was the school that we were not able to go to on our final day. But he co-led a letter with him, with Chairwoman Lee, and with Joaquin Castro to President Biden, telling him ways that he could do tangible things to make a big difference in the daily lives of the Palestinians by talking to the Israelis about loosening up some things and maybe making a difference in their lives. This isn't something that we did looking for a fanfare or anything. We just did it because we felt very strongly about it, and we thought that was a better way to get the word across, and I'm hoping that the administration will follow through with some of those things. And if they don't, I've got Secretary Blinken coming before my committee soon. You can bet I'll ask him about it. So I want to say thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to come and talk to you today, and for this wonderful, wonderful trip. It truly was life-changing. Thank you so much.
So I think I'll leave us also with a story. I had on my final day of our visit a bit of a metaphysical experience myself. In the morning, we started the morning in the Old City, and we went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and visited the Holy Mount and walked, of course, on the holiest of grounds, and heard the stories and came to understand the way in which that space manifests physical conflict. And later in that day, we went to Yad Vashem, which of course is the Holocaust Memorial. And at the very end of it, if any of you have ever visited Yad Vashem, there's a deck overlooking a cypress forest on a hillside. And after I had walked through the museum, I went out there and there was a breeze rolling in off the hill. And my grandmother, my sister's grandmother, who is Jewish and who was very involved in Israel, had always been a donor for the fund that planted trees in Israel. And as I was standing on that porch, it was like a message from my grandmother had been delivered on the wind from the trees. And I literally had a moment standing there where I realized that I had a moral responsibility to help fight for peace in this place where my family and where so many people have such a personal connection. When I came home to the United States, I was deeply troubled for weeks. I couldn't sleep. I was so disturbed by many of the things that I had seen, troubled by the moral and ethical issues that underpin all of the conflict and challenges that we had seen on the ground. And when I was asked a few months later if I would help to lead a letter to the administration, helping to bring light to evictions that the military was initiating in the West Bank, I knew that that message that had been delivered to me that afternoon at Yad Vashem from my grandmother was a message of action. And so I was proud this summer, in advance of the president's visit to Israel, to lead a letter with 81 members of Congress in both the House and the Senate, asking the Israeli government to not evict these communities in Masafer Yatta and to continue to work for peace. And so, like everyone here, I was deeply impacted by this trip. It was life-changing. It helped me to forge friendships with my colleagues, but also with members of the J Street staff and board that I will cherish and I'm sure are lifelong friendships. But also, I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to reconnect and to be able to stand there and receive that message. So I want to say thank you, and thank you to everyone who makes it possible for us to do our work and to serve you in Congress and to continue to fight the good fight for peace across the planet.
Wow. Thank you so much to Representatives Caston, Wexton, Dean, and Stansbury for traveling with us and joining us today to share those inspiring, meaningful impressions and insights. We are delighted that so many of the participants in the Len Hill Education Program trips are newer members of Congress who represent the future of decision-making on the issues that we care so deeply about, whether it be on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, diplomacy worldwide, or ensuring democracy and fundamental rights at home and abroad. We could not be more thrilled that joining this forward-looking group of rising stars in the House will be Representative-elect Becca Balint, who will be sworn in next month as the first woman to represent Vermont in Congress. The incoming Congresswoman and her colleagues will be at the forefront of safeguarding not only the values that we at J Street hold dear, but the most fundamental rights of all Americans to advocate to their government, to have control over their own lives and bodies, and to have their vote count. Over the last few days, we've explored both on this stage and in dozens of breakout sessions the inextricable linkages between fighting for our values in U.S. Middle East policy and fighting for our own democracy here at home. We are so grateful to have allies in the fight like Representative-elect Balint and are delighted that she has offered some thoughts by video on the challenges ahead.
Hello to all the conference attendees. I'm Becca Balint, the Congresswoman-elect from the state of Vermont, and I very much wish I could be there with you in person to celebrate my historic win. I will be the very first woman to represent Vermont in Congress, and I am so honored to be going to DC to represent this state that I love so much. And I'm very grateful to J Street PAC for support in my race, not just because I value the partnership with J Street and truly appreciate the financial support, but also because this relationship is going to become increasingly important, and it will certainly grow stronger as we together face the serious dangers and threats to our democracy and to democracies around the globe. We've all watched in horror as so many citizens of the world and of our own nation seem to have forgotten the terrible, painful lessons of the Holocaust. We see fascism and authoritarianism on the rise globally, and we see our own homegrown white supremacists, anti-Semites, and hate mongers getting purchased with far too many political leaders. We see that there are a significant number of members of Congress who do not believe in free and fair elections. I know the theme of the conference this year is living our values, defending democracy. I'm grateful to you for being so clear and so direct about what's at stake. The threat to our democracy is why I ran for Congress. And I'm not alone. That's true for many of the freshmen coming in with me. As some of you know, but many of you may not, the rise of authoritarianism is not theoretical to me. And it's particularly personal and frightening to me. My grandfather, Leopold Ballant, was killed on a forced march from Mauthausen concentration camp in the last few weeks of the war. I was taught from a very young age that democracies don't fail overnight. They fail little by little as our rights are stripped away, as norms are eroded, as people are scapegoated, as fellow citizens are demonized, as the press is attacked. It gives me chills to say that we are seeing these signs here in our own country now. And we must all do everything that we can to stand against those who seek to destroy our democracy. And we have to be ever vigilant and tend to those threats overseas as well, including in Israel. Following the election in Israel, I was very moved by the words of Jeremy Ben-Ami. He wrote, "The election results in Israel are deeply troubling for all who care about Israel and about liberal democracy globally. For those whose core values of justice, equality, and freedom are fundamentally at odds with those of the parties and the leaders that won." And he continued, "An ultra-right Netanyahu government should force a moment of serious reckoning of all Americans who care about the nature of the US-Israel relationship and who care about a just, equal, and democratic future for both Israelis and Palestinians." Ben-Ami speaks my mind, and I will be a strong supporter and partner in this work. I will be a strong ally in Congress, fighting for democratic ideals, human rights, and the constant pursuit of truth and peace. I look forward to doing this critical work together, and I'll be taking a seat in Congress that has long been occupied by a great friend to J Street, Peter Welch. I know he will continue to be a strong ally and friend as he moves over to the Senate. And I am eager for us to work together on these issues that we both care about so deeply and that we know are important to our constituents. Thank you most sincerely for your support. Onward with courage, all of us.
Our thanks again to Representative-elect Ballant for her remarks. We are so much looking forward to working closely with her in the next Congress. Usually, welcoming a new member of Congress in a particular seat means saying goodbye to another with whom we've worked. But happily, this is not the case here. As the incoming Congresswoman noted, she will be taking over the seat of one of J Street's longest and dearest friends, who will be sworn in as Senator for Vermont in just a few weeks. Senator-elect Peter Welch is concluding his 8th term as Vermont's at-large member of Congress. Before his election to Congress in 2006, he served as Senate Pro Temp of the Vermont State Senate. A tireless champion for security and rights of both Israelis and Palestinians, Senator-elect Welch has authored or co-authored numerous congressional letters and pieces of legislation supported by the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement, pressing for diplomacy and humanitarian aid. His is one of the most deeply respected voices on our issues, as is his ability to join together large coalitions of his fellow legislators in support of consequential vehicles and initiatives. We could not be more excited to see him move across the Capitol to the Senate, where he has won the seat of the retiring President Pro Tem, stalwart human rights defender and fellow friend of J Street, Patrick Leahy. We've asked Senator-elect Welch to cap off this conference, in which we've heard from so many incredible lawmakers and other experts about the fight that lies ahead and J Street's role in it. We are so deeply honored that as he prepares to take on the awesome responsibility of being a United States Senator, he has taken time to be with us today to share his impressions and insights. It is my privilege to welcome to the stage Senator-elect Peter Welch.
Hey, everybody. Well, I got to tell you, it's my honor to be here, and I was standing back here and listening to Becca Balint. The Vermont congressional seat, I think it's fair to say, is in good hands, really good hands. And I heard my colleagues, and it is true I'm going to the Senate. You know, it's kind of like a big deal. I was over there for orientation. They're treating me like I'm, a senator, and kind of felt good for a while. But it's not all it's cracked up to be. You know, at the end of the day, somebody came over and handed me a key and said, your office is in the basement of one of those buildings over there, Dirksen, I think. And I went over, and it's like these dark rooms with no windows. And they told me, come back in 6 or 7 months. We may have a real office for you. That's a true story. I'm not kidding. Hey, it's serious what's going on. We are here to defend democracy. Our democracies here in the United States and in Israel are under very severe threat. We're all here because we love the United States. We all love Israel. But our deepest commitment is not to the United States as it is, or to Israel as it is. Our commitment is to the ideals upon which America was founded and Israel was founded. And think about our declaration in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Ours still rings so excitingly true today. All men are created equal and are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we take that as an injunction to make it our life's work and the life work of this nation to expand those ideals of liberty and freedom and to make them a reality for all people in this country, women, obviously, as well as men, people of all races and all creeds and identities. And Israel's Declaration of Independence is likewise so daring in its affirmation of the dignity of all citizens. It states, as you know, it will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, regardless of religion, race, or sex. Now, we've had a powerful tool in this country and in Israel since its founding to achieve those aspirational goals, and that's our democracy. Democracy, that form of government where we all have a seat at the table and where we expand the table and set more chairs so that all will be heard. And that democracy has served us so well for hundreds of years, but its survival is not guaranteed. It's under attack by powerful anti-democratic forces in this country, foremost among them, the 45th President of the United States. You know, less than 2 years ago, as we all know, January 6th, the Capitol was attacked by that angry, violent mob, provoked, in fact, by the former president. They had a stated intent goal on overturning the free and fair election. I was in the gallery during the attack with colleagues. I was 20 feet from where that shot was fired. I could hear and I could see the attackers trying to break down the doors, shattering the glass of those iconic entry doors where the president comes to Congress to give the address to the nation. And I heard the shouts of "Hang Mike Pence" and "Where's Nancy?" But amidst all this turmoil of those moments, the shot and the glass shattering, my most vivid memory is not the fear I had. My most vivid memory is that even as I was there and seeing it happen, I did not believe it was happening. This was the United States of America. This cannot be happening. And I had, during all of this, a police officer with his gun drawn standing over me. I didn't believe it was happening. We've never had in this country a violent attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power. But you know what? As sad as that was, and as scary as it was for all of us, what awaited us when we returned to the Capitol at 3 a.m. was even sadder still, and for our nation more terrifying. 147 of my colleagues, they voted, despite the violence, to overturn the election of Joe Biden as President of the United States, a clear rejection of our democratic system. And these were 147 people I'd worked with, many of whom I knew well, many of whom I had real affection for, and all of whom I had wrongly assumed shared the norm that the people would decide who our leader was, not the politicians. It was the saddest day of my 16 years serving in Congress. Despite the attack, Joe Biden was inaugurated, but the battle to preserve our democracy continues, and that's, of course, why we're here. And we can take heart. You know, we made real progress in November. Despite over 300 Republicans running on Stop the Steal for governor, for U.S. Senate, for the House, for secretaries of state, American voters, by and large, repudiated them. But the fight does continue. You know, Donald Trump, the 45th president, now wants to be the 47th president. And he continues to promote the Stop the Steal lie. And he is spewing increasingly anti-democratic propaganda. Just yesterday, he said he'd throw out the Constitution. He's gone so far as to have dinner with Nick Fuentes, an avowed racist and anti-Semite, and condone his hate-filled agenda. And all of us here, too, are concerned about what's happening in Israel, contending with many of these same forces. The former prime minister is maneuvering to be the future prime minister and reaching out to parties in Israel that were previously deemed completely outside the boundaries of Israel's democratic traditions. You know, Bibi didn't have dinner with Trump and Ye and Fuentes, but it's clear he's serving the same menu, welcoming Ben-Gvir, someone convicted of inciting racism and supporting Jewish terrorism, and building a coalition with Smotrich, a virulent opponent of LGBTQ rights. Netanyahu hasn't explicitly said, like Trump, that he'd tear up the Constitution, but his actions display a callous disregard for the principles of Israel's Declaration of Independence. Why is he working to create a government that not only opposes the two-state solution, but one that would include ministers who would expel Arab Israeli citizens? That's 21% of Israel's population, 20% of its doctors, 25% of its nurses, almost 50% of its pharmacists. And just as I could not believe the House chamber was being attacked, even as I was there when it was, none of us want to believe that Israeli politicians are forming a coalition that includes ministers who so violently oppose the universal commitment of Israel's magnificent Declaration of Independence that makes all citizens equal. Israel has never, ever gone there before. We support Israel because we cherish its Declaration of Independence and all of the goals that aspires. But I cannot support Netanyahu's efforts to undermine the very aspirations of the democratic state of Israel by marginalizing, annexing, and compromising the rights of Arab Israeli citizens. So what do we do? What do we do? We must defend democracy. If Bibi and his far-right allies want to annex the West Bank, we say, no way. We build support here in the Middle East, community by community. If Bibi and his far-right allies want to take control of the Israeli Supreme Court, we say, no way. We stand for the rule of law and push back forcefully. If Bibi and his far-right allies want to marginalize Israeli Arabs, citizens, we build stronger relationships with our Israeli Arab friends to show a different, more inclusive path. And if Bibi and his far-right allies want to expand settlements to kill the prospect of a two-state solution, we stay true to J Street's mission and fight like hell to keep the two-state solution prospect alive. Bibi and Trump want to go backwards. We say not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And how do we do that? Here and in Israel, we save the tool that democracy is that has so saved us. This election in November, right here in the United States, gave me hope. You know, President Biden did something quite remarkable. His poll numbers were down. The narrative, just only a few weeks ago, that was established in this election was that it was about inflation in the economy, and Republicans would sweep the House and probably take the Senate. Despite that, President Biden, a week before the election, went to Union Station and spoke about democracy. And American voters responded. Our fellow citizens defended democracy. Stop the Steal, election denier candidates were rejected. We lost the House, but only barely, and we won the Senate, and tomorrow in Georgia, we're going to pick up another seat. But we all know, we can get excited because we're doing things. We all know, nevertheless, that the long-term outlook and survival of our democracy, it's not assured. Those norms of the peaceful transfer of power and mutual respect for the rights of all, so essential for the democratic form of government, are being challenged. But we have to persist. Abraham Lincoln was asked about what he would do and why does he do it at an even more dire time. And he said, I'm not bound to win, but I'm bound to be true. I'm not bound to success, but I am bound to live up to what light I have. My friends, I'm with Abraham Lincoln. I wake up in the morning and my goal is to take on what the day will bring. We do not live, we're choosing the times we live in or the challenges that await us. We decide to wake up and face those challenges and do it together because that's the only course that caring, decent people will take. Face the day, face the challenges, and do it together. You all have made your decision by being part of J Street, by committing to the values that this organization has embodied since its founding. That we will continue to do to expand that democratic table so that the mother in Jerusalem, that young small business owner in Ramallah, that student in Tel Aviv, each has a seat at the table. Each is invested in strengthening Israel's democracy, the tool that we must use to improve the lives of all of our citizens here and there. You have come here, we have all come here, to affirm each other, to vow tomorrow and forever, in dire times, and we have them now, not just in good times, that we will continue to fight for democracy, for the dignity of all people. Thank you, J Street. Thank you, one and all. Bye-bye.
We can't thank Senator-elect Welch enough for his remarks today and for his years of friendship and counsel. And what a clear call from one of our movement's greatest champions for redoubling our advocacy in the face of the challenges ahead. Tomorrow, hundreds of you will blanket Capitol Hill, meeting directly with lawmakers and their top staff to discuss what needs to be done in the months ahead to advance diplomacy and preserve democracy. That kind of advocacy takes both time and resources, and here to talk about the ways in which all of you can support this work is longtime J Street leader and advocate for peace, science, and democracy, Nancy Goroff.
Hello there, J Street. So many friends. I'm Nancy Goroff. I remember very clearly in 2009, the first day that someone told me about this new organization called J Street. I went home that night and Googled it and made my first contribution that night. I remember thinking, this is the group I've been waiting for. I knew we needed an organization that was solidly pro-Israel, but not anti-Palestinian. An organization rooted in Jewish values, especially that most important value of tikkun olam. An organization that could change the conversation in the United States to focus on real solutions, with the US as a genuine partner in peace. In 2020, my own career took a bit of a turn. I went from being a professor of chemistry and chair of the chemistry department at Stony Brook University to running for Congress against Trump apologist Lee Zeldin. I saw then firsthand how important J Street is for our political candidates as a source not just of funds, but also of information and energy. J Streeters, some of them right up here in this room, were among my most passionate and effective volunteers. It was clear to me in 2009 that our community and our country desperately needed an organization like J Street. It was clear to me in 2020 that our political process needs an organization like J Street. And this wonderful gathering here truly underscores for me today that now more than ever, we need J Street. It's just so important that we have this home, this powerful voice for the vast majority of Jewish Americans who are proudly pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-democracy. Like all of you, I care deeply about the future of democracy and equality in this country and in Israel. And I'm grateful that J Street exists to fight for that future. I'm grateful that J Street exists to stand up to endless conflict, occupation, and settlement expansion, to expose leaders like Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, who promote policies of fear, hate, and repression, and trample on shared democratic values. I'm grateful that here in the US, J Street stands up to Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans and mobilizes to support candidates who will defend democracy, champion diplomacy, and take steps to help Israelis and Palestinians change their dangerous, deteriorating status quo. We don't just need J Street. We need it to keep growing and thriving to face these threats and challenges. And J Street needs us, all of us, to make sure that it continues to grow, fight, and lead the way for years to come. So here's the punchline. We need J Street, and J Street needs us. That's why I'm asking all of you here in this room right now, and all of you watching at home, to consider making a contribution right now to J Street, and why I am personally pledging to match all gifts to J Street over the next few days, up to $25,000 in total. Thanks to the great J Street staff, you should be receiving or will soon receive a text or email from J Street showing you how you can contribute to the work of this special organization, this special movement that has given all of us a principled and impactful political home. Many of you have already supported J Street, and I ask you to consider digging deep to make another contribution now. At this critical time, please believe me that any gift of any size will help make a difference. Thank you to J Street for this outstanding conference with so much for us to learn and so many actions for us to take. And thanks to all of you for your support and making it possible.
Friends, the next round of breakout sessions begin promptly at 3:45. To prepare for tonight's dinner, we kindly ask you to gather all of your belongings from the ballroom and exit expeditiously. We appreciate your cooperation. Have a great afternoon.